Now, are there limitations? Absolutely. But that's something we have to pray about. I don't think that a plant that grows on this earth that provides some medicinal purposes that it does, I just don't think there's anything wrong. I think it would have been more of a sin to not help my wife and watch her suffer than to do what was necessary. I answer to God more than I answer to man.
Hey there, everybody. Amy Register here. You know me from Ask a Christian, and today you've just heard a little bit, just a snippet from the interview upcoming from my new friend. In case you're new here, you haven't been following, this is a channel dedicated to authentic discussion surrounding Christianity, the Bible, and what it looks like to follow Jesus as an example. We're doing a series called Conversations Christians Suck At, highlighting topics that the church has traditionally not done really well at explaining. We haven't maybe showed up in the marketplace, or we've underrepresented some topics, but generally have had trouble connecting with culture on the things that I'm talking about. So there's some fun ones you can go back and watch. We're kind of on a segment now that is hot topic for the US. Anyway, we're going to be doing a couple at least on the topic of marijuana, cannabis, and today my guest is Mike Furches. You can look him up. He has a book that he'll talk a little bit about, and I'll make sure to link in Amazon for you. It talks all about his life story. I'm kind of sad we didn't have a ton of time to get into his love story, which is extraordinarily amazing and beautiful. This guy spent some time homeless. He's dabbled in a lot of cool things, film and radio. He's in the Blues Hall of Fame. So very interesting guy, very interesting story, all different parts of his life. And so I met him on a forum that I started chiming in while I was doing research on this topic, called the Christian Cannabis Fellowship. So yeah, just interesting guy. Got to know him a little there, and I wanted to invite him on to tell his story. So the topic that we're talking about today is medical cannabis, medical marijuana. We're going to talk about maybe a little bit more facts and figures and stuff in the next interview next week. But I wanted you to get a background here on Mike. I'm just going to let him tell his story, maybe follow up a little bit at the very end. But here's my disclaimer. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's brought up in the conversation today, but my goal is that the church, the Christian community, would do a better job at just introducing and having these conversations. There's a lot of people who are struggling with things that cannabis has been tested for, specifically nausea, and specifically some pain relief. So I know that out of all the things that people say cannabis can do for them, like nausea specifically has been tested, and over other narcotics and pain relief, there have been at least some anecdotal stories. And so that's why I feel comfortable bringing this guy's story up today. So I'm not going to interrupt much today. I'm going to let Mike tell the story of him and his wife and the results they got from cannabis and how the church reacted. It's kind of a good story. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll chat you at the very end and tell you what's coming up next. So thank you so much for joining me. Leave your comments, and if you've got anything to say, I'll address them at the end. Here's Mike.
Hey, Amy, how you doing?
Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you. Will you kick us off by telling me a little bit about your background and why you are uniquely positioned to talk about Christianity and marijuana?
Well, first of all, there's a book about my background. We'll talk about that later. So I won't give you the full 700-page manuscript.
Thank you.
What I will say is that I did not grow up in a Christian home and in a Christian environment. My grandparents were Christians, but I went from place to place, scenario to scenario. I was in a foster care home. My mother was 15 when she got pregnant. She married my dad out of necessity. He was killed before I was 1, and she was pregnant with another child. She married a second time. This time the guy was like a hobo, was killed hopping a train in Chicago. Then I was put in foster care, and then was taken out of foster care by grandparents. Abuse began to take place in various forms. Ultimately, I was abused sexually and physically by my mother and her third and fourth husband. And so I've spoken about that, written about that. But growing up in that environment, I didn't stay at home very often. In fact, I left home when I was 15 and was homeless. But up until that time, while I was growing up, my grandparents were Christians. And I would go to church with them, and I was just repulsed at Christianity because what I saw from the teachings of Jesus, as opposed to the lifestyle of those in the churches, it was nothing I wanted to do with. In fact, there was times I cursed God, I hated God. And then I heard this preacher. We were running with a gang in a project area of Upper East Tennessee, and I'd heard of this preacher that had worked with gangs in New York City. And a bunch of us went to hear him speak. His name was David Wilkerson. And we went to hear him speak, and we were so rowdy and so messed up that he literally called us down from stage. Said, "Security, those of you up there, watch those boys up there in section 205. If they keep it up, get them out of here. In my service, we will show respect and honor to God, or I will not allow them in the presence of this congregation, this room." And so we respected that. This guy was speaking with a level of authority. And here's all these gangbangers up there. And the story's in the book. And I prayed that when I got saved and I wrote the book after I'd been saved for a while, I prayed and prayed and prayed. I said, "Holy Spirit, give me every word, everything that happened as close to possible, looking back in memory." But I got saved, and I became what would be called in some circles a Jesus freak. I am very conservative theologically, which freaks people out because I play in rock and roll bands and I've worked with all kinds of bands. Culturally, I think there's a difference between cultural components of our faith and fundamental belief systems related to our faith. Culturally, some people would consider me liberal. I've got tattoos all over. I've got piercings. I got ears pierced and other things as well. But culturally, I see that as a tool to enable me to better witness to folks. But I ended up going to college. It was a miracle. I was homeless my last 2 years of high school. It was a miracle to finish high school, much less go to college, then go to graduate school. And I've been sold out to Jesus. I'm very fundamental in my belief system. And I study scripture. I really do. I have my Alexa set up every day at 9:00 a.m. Mike, read the Bible. I put constant reminders in there to have me do things like that. My faith is extremely, I know what God saved me from. There's a passage in Mark that says, "He who has sinned more has been forgiven more and therefore loves God more." I know everything and every piece of garbage that I ever did to get God's forgiveness in my life. So I'm very fundamental in my belief system in that way. Jesus was born of a virgin. He rose again. He's the only begotten Son of God. He means what he says. There's no other way to the Father except through him. I believe all of that from the bottom of my heart, and I live that. But I also believe that when he says that he came to seek and save the lost, he meant exactly what he said, and we are to do the Father's business and showing people up. So very conservative. And now growing up, I did some drugs. I never had an addictive behavior, although many in my family did. And one of the drugs that I did was marijuana. And for many, many years, it was the only drug of the drugs that I did that I still craved. So I didn't do it. It had nothing to do with it. I was opposed to the usage of it in any way, shape, fashion, or form. And then on July 22nd in 2018-19, less than a week after I had been inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame, my wife is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at that point in time, my life changed. My book is a story, we'll talk about this later, but it's a story about finding love. I never felt that I experienced physical love on this earth until I met my wife. And I had felt God's love, but there's something people say, well, God's with you. Well, yes, he is, but he was with Adam too, but he still saw the need to create a partner. And so my wife was my partner for 43 years. We were married for 41, a little over 41. And when someone you love that deeply and that passionately gets that sick, you do what you can. And as I did research outside of the Whipple surgery, there was not one case not one instance ever documented of a stage 4 pancreatic cancer patient surviving. So I had people saying that, well, you need to have faith and put your faith in the Bible and not science. I respect that, but there was not one that I could determine and find. There were stories of success with the Whipple surgery. Other than that, I could not find one documented case. So we knew from the outset, she was diagnosed at stage 4. We knew from the outset, from the discussions with the oncologist and the surgeons and so forth, that at best, without the Whipple, she had 6 months to live. With the Whipple, she could have up to 2 years to live, and in rare instances, that the lifespan would be longer. Now, nowadays, there are numerous people that live with the Whipple surgery that live upwards of 10 years, 15 years, and some that end up dying of natural causes, but it's very rare. In most instances, most people that have the Whipple, then have it successfully, they live 2 years after the Whipple on average. So I became very knowledgeable because I love this woman with the passion. I was going to do everything humanly possible to keep her alive for as long as I could, under her approval, because there's a lot of things that go into that. So, and it became hard. I became her caregiver, which meant that I could not work. I could not draw an income. I could not solicit the funds for ministry. And in the state of Kansas, caregivers, if I had been a hooker off the street, I could have made upwards of $1,500 a month caring for my wife. But because I was her spouse, I was not eligible for any substantive support financially. So,
well, you still could have been a hooker, Mike. I just,
yeah, I could have. Yeah,
what was holding you back from that?
I heard extra money, but I had to leave the house for that. But that was that's how I became knowledgeable about cannabis. And as a person of faith, whose faith is, I have a deeply held, I know who my Jesus is. I will never leave my Lord because I know what he's done for me. And I love him with a passion. But I love, my wife was the first instrument that he used to show me what it was like to be loved by another human being. So, wow. Yeah.
Mike, when you started using cannabis to help your wife throughout her treatment time, the life that she had on earth, those precious months that you knew you had, you turned to cannabis for some relief. And I would love to hear from you. What's the tale on how it worked for you and your wife?
It was amazing. Working with Shauna Banda had given me some insight, and I'd done a ton of research. And I thought, I was actually in the hospital room, and I've been looking at cannabis research, and there were some friends that was in the hospital room with us when the oncologist came into the room. And I won't share his name because he supported us, and it's not legal in Kansas. But we're sitting in the room, and one of the ladies that's in the room, a good friend of ours, she says just out of clear, Doc, I've got a question. Mike's been talking about some kind of oils or something. CBD, and the doc said, he said, CBDs. And she said, yeah. And this is what the oncologist said. He said, CBD will do absolutely no good for what Mary Jane needs. What she needs is THC. But he said, if I was Mr. Furches and I was in his shoes, he said, and it was my wife, I know what I would do. And again, it's not legal or readily available in the state of Kansas, but I know exactly what I would do. I knew then I had a friend. And so I know, hey, Doc, just because it's not legal or readily available doesn't mean it can't be used and it's not available. And he said, that's exactly right, Mr. Furches. And again, if it was my wife, I know exactly what I would do. Well, I had done some research. The American Cancer Society recommends that for neuropathy, which becomes an issue with cancer patients, which is a numbness and a stinging in the fingers and the toes, they recommend that for neuropathy that individuals smoke cannabis. Well, my wife never tasted, literally, honest to God, she never drank a beer, never tasted a beer in her life. She would drink wine coolers on occasion because she had esophageal spasms, and that's what the doctor recommended from the time that my daughter was born 40 years ago now. So she wouldn't touch alcohol. She never smoked. I grew up in a totally non-Christian environment. She grew up in an absolutely wonderful Christian environment. In one of the oldest churches in the state of Tennessee, her grandparents were founding members of that church. But we did the research. There were various ways that you could take cannabis. And so initially we looked at the Rick Simpson oils. So much research was ridiculous. And anybody can go on YouTube and find the Rick Simpson oils. And we had been told, well, it's extremely expensive for a very small amount that's from a very potent, and it's considered a narcotic that's made out of cannabis. So I found a recipe that I adapted for oils that made 5 times the quantity of the Rick Simpson oil for much, much less money. We started, God is my witness, Amy. Mary Jane was in excruciating pain because she was taking narcotics that clogged her up and she could not go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
I can so vividly see her curled up on the bed, crying and wrenching in pain to this day. She was what I call projectile vomiting 7 to 9 times a day. And she wouldn't eat because she was throwing up so much. Within the week of starting her on the cannabis, again, God is my witness, and there were witnesses, nurses and doctors and everyone else around that saw this, hospice workers that ended up seeing it. Within the week, she went from projectile vomiting 7 to 9 times a day to where she did not vomit again for a year and a half, more than 7 to 10 times total.
Wow.
She went from being in excruciating pain, curled up in her bed, writhing in pain, to once she started cannabis, she did not take a pain pill or medication again until the day before she died, a year and a half later, which was unheard of with stage 4 cancer where she was diagnosed. A year and a half later, the day before she died, she took a half a dose of morphine. And the day she died, she took a full dose of morphine. But outside of that, never once did she have to take another pain medication. I could not, as a former person who was opposed, again, I was opposed because I still had an addictive behavior where I desired and craved it, but I didn't use it. The only drug I did heroin. The only drug I ever craved was weed, but I wouldn't use it. But then I was at the position where I was giving it to my wife, and then talking to medical doctors and everyone since then, my attitude began to change, and I did what was necessary. And it helped immensely. I can't believe how much does someone have to hate someone and not love them to not do what's best, or at least take a chance to see if it's going to help that individual. I have many, many friends that have died with cancer since Mary Jane's died. And it's like, I'll tell them, this is what I did for Mary Jane. Yeah, but it's not legal. I'm not touching it. I'm not going to give that to my wife. I don't know what it'll do to him. I don't understand that. To me, that's not love. That's some belief system or some political belief is driving your system in regards to something that might legitimately help someone.
You and your wife, Christians at this time, what was the church's reception? Did they know about your pursuit of cannabis for medicinal purposes? And how did they react? And how do your friends react?
Well, first of all, I was very much on the down low because I just remember I've been working with Shonda, and the state of Kansas just spent $750,000 trying to put her in prison for 30 years. And I was at the place, there's a thing called jury nullification, which is what Ron Paul and others are trying to get Shonda to fight for. But the state of Kansas, what they did is they backslid so much that they realized they were going to go to jury nullification and probably lose. So what the state of Kansas did is they said, okay, here's what we'll do: 2 years probation, you can live it out wherever you want to, and a $1 fine. And that really was the settlement that got Shonda to where she ended up pleading. I wish that she had not pleaded, it would have gone to jury nullification, because that would have changed the laws of the state of Kansas. Initially, I was very much on the down low. And then I had a few trusted friends that I would talk to, some that live in Colorado now, that actually grow it for medical purposes, and they were helping me understand things. 2 of the initial providers of the product, the marijuana, were pastors. Which shocked me. It totally, literally, one was bringing me cannabis butter. Mike, put this on some toast. You gotta try this, try that. And that was early on in the stages. And another one said, Mike, my family had a family. I have a family member that she has to have it because she's got MS, and it helps with MS. So take some of this and try it for marriage. Another pastor friend. And so there were those. Now, since when I knew that Mary Jane had less than a month to live, I became much more open about it. So, but I became much more open because I was like, and I still am, go ahead. Let me tell my story and give the medical evidence of how this helped my wife, and you find a jury to convict me. You're not going to do it.
Right.
So I'm much bolder. I'm doing this, and I've done other programs like it, because I believe that as a Christian, I believe that God has provided ways to care for. He tells us to care for the orphan, the widow, the sick, the needy, the one in prison. It's not suggestions when Jesus does. In Matthew chapter 24, when he gives those guidelines of sheep and goats, who is and who's not going to enter the kingdom of heaven, one of those conditions is visiting people or helping people that are sick. Those are not suggestions. They're I think, commandments. They're expectations. So as a follower in Jesus, how can I say that I love God? Of all the commandments, none are greater than these two. Love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Of all the commandments, there's none greater than these two. For when you kept these two, you've kept them all. That's the Mark translation as opposed to Matthew, because I think Mark adds a little bit extra into that. So I was amazed at Christians that supported my efforts and support me now to this day. I'm talking fundamentalist, Southern Baptist, Seventh-day Adventist. I'm talking Methodist. I'm talking Christians from all walks of life. And pastors. I'm shocked. Now, are there those that are still out there that are judgmental? Absolutely. But when I tell my story, they tend to shut up because they don't have any way to respond. And so the issue I found now is not from the religious backlash. It's from the political backlash.
What have you heard people say, in Christianity or out on the streets or in the political arena that really makes you cringe? Things about marijuana that make you just say, no, that's not how it is.
Yeah, I think the main one is just an absolute denial of the benefit of it from a medical perspective, especially that I shouldn't do that. I'm in sin. I'm encouraging wrongful behavior. And there are some real issues that need to be addressed. One of the things I've had trouble with personally is that most of the marijuana that's coming into this country is coming from the southern border through drug cartels. I believe that's a reason for legalization as opposed to keeping it basically as a black market drug. I don't want to support those drug cartels and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So, but I hear things in regards to there's no acceptance. I've been told I'm not a Christian. Well, you can't be a Christian. You're a heretic. I've been called a heretic more times than I can count for simple things like this. What kind of Christian would you put your wife into that? Weren't you concerned about her getting addicted to it or the side effects? And these are people that they were within 2 blocks of my house and would never come and visit and see my wife. Ooh. So, boy, talk about wearing on you and getting you ticked off. I'm using my language carefully. That would do it. People that would just make speculative beliefs without ever coming and seeing firsthand. There are a number of medical people. Again, I'm talking hospice. I'm talking the oncologist. I'm talking the family doctor. I'm talking friends who are nurses that saw firsthand and their opinions changed. Oh my gosh.
If we had 10 years to rectify the hurts, the things that we've said wrong about marijuana usage, what would that look like? What would our churches be doing differently?
Well, there's a whole debate here, Amy, as to the whole purpose of the church. That's a popular debate now. I believe that the purpose of the church, the purpose of the pastor is to train and equip the saints for the carrying out of the gospel. That's what it says in Timothy, and there's not many ways differently that you can interpret that. I personally believe that the church is designed to be trained to worship an almighty God who chose to love us so much that he sent his only son to die for us on the cross. And through the receipt of that son, we can now have a relationship with God, which is back to the original intent of why we were ever created to begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Mike Furches, we'd cover a lot of ground today. We'd do some more if we had more time. Is there any last bit of wisdom, advice, a song, a poem? Is there any other tidbit you want people to know before you go?
Yeah, there's 2 tidbits I'll give. One of them is actually a poem. The tidbit, people that want to know more about me, my book, The Keystone Kid, it's at Amazon, major retailers. It's a 5-star reviewed book, and it tells the story of finding love. If you read that book, you'll find out why my wife was so important to me. So I'll plug that. Pastor Mike, the Demon Slayer Blues Band is my band. Been endorsed by many, many people in the Blues Hall of Fame. I'm in the Blues Hall of Fame. But if I had to leave a thought, I love Langston Hughes. And my heart, my ministry is not per se to Christians. It's to people on the fringes. And if I had to, I love Langston Hughes. And I wrote a song that other people have recorded. I've never recorded it. It's called Dreams. It's based on his poem Dreams, that says, hold fast to dreams, for if dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. So I tell folks to hold on to whatever your dreams are. And then I would say ultimately realize that those dreams can only come to full fruition through Christ. So that's what I would leave with.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your stories. And I'm looking forward to meeting up with you again somewhere in Kansas, or if not here on earth, then in heaven.
Salt and sea.
Thank
you, Amy. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Mike Furches. Again, if you didn't catch me at the beginning, the goal of this interview is to just bring up the topic of marijuana, especially medical cannabis. You know, cannabis is still not legal in all states. I'm here in California, so it kind of seems ridiculous. There's a lot of cannabis dispensaries, you know, just around the area. And some of you guys live in states where that's the norm, but this man is in Kansas where it's not the norm. And he had to fight internally, you know, with himself through his own past. He had to take it to God in prayer. He had to talk to different people in his church. And so, this is just one part of the series. Next week, I'm going to be talking to a gentleman named Todd Miles, who has written a book called Cannabis and the Christian, What the Bible Says About Marijuana. He's going to have a little bit more of the academic side, and I'm talking to him about evangelism, how we can keep this discussion as kind of a non-issue, how we can, why Christians get stirred up about this topic more than many other topics. So the goal, again, is not to punch holes in the church or go swinging. In fact, you heard Mike had a pretty good response from his local church folks. So my goal is to bring this conversation to the forefront. We'll take more weeks on it if you want to talk about it more. If you know somebody who has a story and it would edify the church, how we can treat people, how we can love people, how we can walk alongside them if they're using medically or even recreationally. We just want to love people, show them Jesus's love. And then if somebody wants to reduce their consumption or look for other ways to manage stress and anxiety, you know, we just want it to be a non-issue as we are helping people pursue Jesus, pursue wholesome relationships. So that's the goal. That's why I brought it up here. And again, Mike's positions are not necessarily shared by me, but I really want to talk about this. I want to be a safe place and a sounding board for people who want to talk about this. So I'll see you guys next week about the same time. Around 6, I'll have an interview with Todd Miles that I think you are really going to enjoy. So thank you for your hanging out with me. And again, if you want to hear this man's amazing life story and love story, you can check out his book, The Keystone Kid. There is an ebook. And check out his music. Just Google Mike Furches. He does have an interesting blues sound. So fun guy. Mike, if you're watching this, thanks so much for giving me your time and your story, and best wishes to you guys. I'll see you next week. As always, I'm wishing you joy and hope and peace for your journey, wherever it leads you. I love you, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.